As the debate around the decision intensifies, some lobby groups, organizations, predominantly the Afrikaner farm unions, are now calling for protest action against the government's planned land restitution policy.
Today, let us close this question once and for all. Let us unite and pay no one for benefiting from the crimes against humanity. Let us come together and agree on this noble, historic and human call to expropriate land without compensation for equal redistribution. Many want us to debate food security and economic development, but how can we do so when we do not have the land? For a lasting peace, security and justice, land must be expropriated without compensation for equal redistribution. We would have failed those who came before us if we were to pay anyone for having committed a genocide. We cannot thank them for having killed innocent people who were fighting to protect their own land.
Honorable Speaker, the ANC unequivocally supports the principle of land expropriation without compensation as moved by the EFF. Honorable Speaker, we may disagree on the modalities, but the principle we agree. There's no question about that. And we are committed to implementing the resolution of the African National Congress, which resonates very well with the motion led by the CIC of the EFF.
Black people were brutally dispossessed and forcibly removed from their land. Decades later, the wounds still run deep. There is an indisputable need to right that wrong, to make amends. My fellow countrymen, Sizwe Sakoti, expropriation without compensation cannot be part of the solution. The process to lawfully implement expropriation without compensation will only prolong the wait for the landless in this country. The government needs to address the weakness in implementing the provisions in the Constitution instead of bowing to populist rhetoric.
The narrative that the land was stolen must stop because it's false. I agree. If we want to debate on a responsible manner about land, we will have to stop that.
The danger that there are those who think that equality in our time means that we must dominate whites.
The ANC, the National Freedom Party, the EFF, and the IFP are all in agreement we must expropriate. So what is the delay? There's no need for a debate. Let's go forward. Let's go out there and expropriate.
As part of the measures to accelerate land redistribution, as we all know, the 54th Conference of the governing party, the African National Congress, resolved that where appropriate and justifiable land will be expropriated without compensation, it will happen. The program of land reform must have clear targets as well as time frames and must be guided by sound legal economic principles and must contribute to the country's overall job creation and investment objectives. As I have been saying, in this new era and in this new dawn, we should see the land reform process, the expropriation of land without compensation, as an opportunity rather than as something that is negative. We should take it upon our shoulders to resolve this original sin.
And now to discuss this issue a little further, we are now joined right here in the studio by Jackie Dugard. She is an associate professor at the Wits Law School. Jackie, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. Now, there have been various efforts to redress the land issue for over 2 decades now, and now we are getting into a more radical, the more radical approach with expropriating land without compensation. Is it legally sound, though, under the current constitution?
I think that what the current constitution does in section 25, and many people don't understand this, is that it provides an incredible framework to balance the various interests. So to balance the interests of dispossessed persons, of persons without land, of persons with insecure land tenure, against the interests of things that the ANC has been talking about recently, food security, economic development, those sorts of things. So the constitution in section 25 very clearly says that compensation for expropriation must be just and equitable. It doesn't say willing buyer, willing seller, so that is a misunderstanding. The fact that there might have been a willing buyer, willing seller approach or policy up until now is a political decision. It's not a legal one. So in terms of the Constitution, all it says is that there must be just and equitable compensation, and it even gives you some of the factors to consider. Those factors are the current use of the land, so there you have land use. So, you know, there you have some of the concerns expressed by President Ramaphosa about food security, because if land is being used for productive food use, then probably it's not going to be expropriated, or a different mandate will be pursued. So that's the first, the current use. Then it's the history of the acquisition. So land that has been dispossessed is more likely to be expropriated, land that has historically been dispossessed. Then we talk about market value, but it's only one of the factors. Then it is direct state subsidies. So if you received state subsidies as a farmer, for example, then that will be taken off the market value. And then finally they talk about, the Constitution talks about the purpose of the expropriation. So all of these things on a case-by-case basis should be used to determine a just and equitable compensation. I would argue that that allows the government a really good framework. In some cases that may result in zero compensation, and that would be regarded as just and equitable in the framework provided in the Constitution.
So can this then be legally challenged, especially by the groups that are now seeking legal recourse with regards to this issue?
Well, first of all, we're some distance away, because we have a resolution from the National Assembly now that is going to the Constitutional Review Committee. I am unsure, of course, no one knows what will happen there. I myself am curious to see if something is to be amended, what is to be amended. But
can they come up with a different decision from the decision that was arrived at in the National Assembly, or they just have to refine, they just have to work with that current decision? If
it is their mandate to look at how one could pursue expropriation without compensation, they could very well say what I have just explained now. They could say, well, this is how we do it. We look at this matrix of things in section 25, and we could come out with zero compensation in those cases where, for example, land has been dispossessed, where it's not being used for food crops, where there is an important public purpose for the expropriation, such as restitution, etc. So that committee could very well say what I have just said, and that would be perfectly, I think, in line with the resolution. What I think the committee may say is that we have to fast track the amendment to the Expropriation Act. There is an Expropriation Act which does speak, it's from the 1970s, and it does speak about willing buyer, willing seller, and market value. The government has been trying to amend that for many years. It's sitting, the president sent it back, the former president, I should say, sent it back. So the committee might well, if they want to change a piece of law, might say, let's push forward the amendment to the Expropriation Act. But the Constitution as it stands, there should be no reason. But you say now the willing buyer, willing seller principle is not in the Constitution. It is not. Right? So is there any, some sort of international best practice that South Africa can tap into to resolve this issue and not to go the Zimbabwe route, for instance? Well, I think that you know, I would agree with President Ramaphosa that one shouldn't get overly anxious, even if you are a property owner. You shouldn't get overly anxious about this for the moment. We don't know where it's going. And secondly, it's very clear when the Constitution was formulated that people thought about the best practices around the world. And they've produced out of that best practice, wherever it be South America, the rest of Africa, etc., they produced a matrix in section 25, the factors that I just explained,
Yep.
that are going to lead to an ability to weigh up all the various considerations in a very reasonable way.
All right, Jackie, I'm afraid we have to end it here, but I'm sure there will be lots and lots of discussion on this issue as time passes by. But thank you so much for your time. That there was Jackie Dugard, an associate professor at the Wits Law School.